Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections, along with the daily mains answer writing program. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion how the global trade is being affected by the power politics, its implications on India, and a robust way forward. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion regarding how the deeply entrenched factors are affecting the women's participation in politics. Then in the prelims pointer section, we'll have a discussion of 5 different topics from a special perspective of the upcoming UPSC prelims 2026 examination along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is about trade in the age of geopolitics. Once upon a time, trade was based on the logic or the principle of efficiency. Means what? Nations produced and exported those goods which they were best at. But now things have changed. Now trade no longer is being guided by the principles of efficiency. It is being driven by power politics, the global power politics. For instance, let's take some examples. Recently, what we saw was US imposed unilateral tariffs on different countries around the world. That is something which is based on power politics. Or let's take the other example. What we also saw post-COVID, that China restricted the supply of certain critical minerals to different countries around the world. Not just critical minerals, even the other things. And that obviously had an effect on the manufacturing capacity of different countries. So what we are looking at is a paradigm where trade is no longer about the markets. Trade is being used as a geopolitical leverage. And that is compromising the interests of various countries, especially those countries who do not have the adequate capacity as that of the major powers, India being the case. Now, this presents both opportunities and challenges for India. Challenges we can very well understand. But why opportunities? India is a very big market. And if we focus on certain areas, if we focus on indigenization, if we focus on self-reliance, then things can change. We have a very beautiful column which has been published in the Hindu, which talk about this aspect, which says that India must move from being a participant in the global system to a shaper of them. We cannot just be a rule taker. We have to be a rule maker. And we'll see. We'll talk about the trade aspects. Now, see, again, very, very important component of GS2 international relations affecting India's interests and GS3 trade. Very, very important topic. We'll try to comprehensively analyze in various dimensions. Now, what is the context? Context kya hai? At the start of 2026, what we have seen is 2 events. India has finalized a free trade agreement with EU, European Union. What we have termed it as the mother of all deals. And also, we are almost at the verge of finalization of a trade deal with the US. Very, very important things. Now, this is basically the context. The very first is the India-EU Free Trade Agreement, and the second is trade understanding with the US. If we talk about the features of the India-EU Free Trade Agreement, there are 2 things which you'll have to understand. The very first thing is that it is capturing a market of almost 2 billion people. That is almost equivalent to 25% of the world's GDP. So that's the reason we are calling it the mother of all deals. Second thing what you'll have to understand is that it would give preferential access to almost 99% of India's exports, especially the labor-intensive sectors like textiles and the other things, leather. So definitely it's a good thing. And again, what it is trying to indicate is India's deepening integration in the global trade. Very good thing for India. We are trying to expand the markets. We are trying to integrate more with the global supply chains. Okay. But it is also reflecting the breakdown of rules-based globalization. What we are witnessing is, as I told you earlier, that the trade basis which we had in the past, it was based on 2 things. And please pay attention, very, very important things. It was primarily based on 2 aspects in the past. The very first was comparative advantage, a theory given by David Ricardo, which says that countries should basically produce and export those commodities which they are relatively better off producing, right? Now, that was basically about the efficiency aspect, and that maintained very good trade relations among different countries. Second was the rule-based international order. Means what? that there are certain rules, there are certain principles, and countries have to abide by that. But right now, what we are witnessing in the present times, that both of these factors, they're being flouted. Both of these principles are not being agreed by various countries, specifically the major powers, specifically the US, primarily because of POTUS, President of the United States. Now, see, what we are trying to say is that right now, the trade is being heavily politicized. Instead of working on the aspects of comparative advantage or rule-based international order, right now we are witnessing the politicization of the international trade. And this is compromising the interest of the weak countries who do not have the adequate capacity. So therefore, this is a very big challenge, especially for a country like India, which aspires to become the Vishwaguru, right? Now, what are the emerging challenges? Now, let's break this into two aspects, okay? Very first aspect is global. At the global level, what are the challenges? The very first is decline of the rule-based order. We had the Bretton Woods Conference, World Bank, IMF. Later, we had the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, GATT, which finally culminated into the World Trade Organization after the Uruguay rounds. Now, World Trade Organization focused on two aspects: free and fair trade. Okay? Free and fair trade. Why? Because at that moment of time, we had the developed world led by the US. It thought that if we would have this particular aspect of free and fair trade, that would inevitably benefit the developed countries. But what we saw at the start of the 21st century, we had China in 2001 joining the WTO. What we saw, an expansive growth rate of the developing countries, what we call as emerging economies, including India, China. And that was a threat. It posed a threat to the developed world. And therefore, they started with the protectionist tendencies. They tried to create firewalls, tried to make sure that the developing countries do not develop the advantage over them, do not develop the comparative advantage over them. And it is because of that, what we are witnessing is unilateral actions being taken by different countries. And mind that EU is not also something which is playing very clean. Let's talk about the CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. See, again, they are saying that we want to protect our industries, we want to protect our environment. And we would make sure that if any country is using the fossil fuels and then exporting that particular good which is produced in that country in EU, then we would make sure that we would apply some tariffs. That is what the CBAM is all about. But understand that we have not developed. If you look at the current crisis with respect to the environment, India is not a country to be blamed. Primarily, you have the developed world, US and the European countries, who are primarily responsible for the present state of crisis as far as the environment is concerned. They are the ones who have released most of the greenhouse gases. And now they're coming up with these principles. So this is something which is affecting the overall scenario. Now they're not talking about the rules. Now they're not talking about the principles of trade. Previously they focused upon free and fair trade. And also understand, they didn't even focus upon the fair aspect. And that is what the Doha Development Agenda talked about. As far as WTO is concerned, I hope you are aware of this. The Doha Development Agenda primarily focused upon the fair trade aspect, because you have already focused on the free aspect, and that is benefiting you, the developed countries. What about the fair aspect? So what you'll have to understand is right now the trade is basically dependent upon the alignments. If you are aligned with us, alignment in terms of what our objectives are. If your objectives are similar to us, then we'll basically have no issues with you. It is no longer based on efficiency. So this is one of the very important concerns. Again, decline of institutions, as I already told you. Right now, if you look at World Trade Organization, it is actually in a paralyzed state. The appellate body, the decision-making, the most important decision-making body of the WTO, it is completely paralyzed. Recently, we saw the ministerial conference did not give any of the fruitful results. So this is the present status of these institutions. In fact, a country like US, it is backing off. It is coming out of these organizations. It is not really, for example, what the present perspective or the take of the president of the US is as far as the UN is concerned, as far as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, as far as the other bodies, UNESCO. US has effectively come out from all these international organizations. So it's a breakdown of the international order, right? And limits of bilateral pacts. Very important to understand. Let's say that India has come up in partnerships, CEPA, CECA, different agreements with various countries. For example, we have had an agreement with the UAE, we had an agreement with the Australia, we had with the EU. So it's a good thing. What we are trying to focus upon is on bilateral pacts on the basis of comparative advantage. We're not including anyone. We're just having a bilateral pact. We are working upon our own strength, and then we are trying to increase the market. So it's good that this would definitely lead to the enhancement of the market and opportunities for India as a country. But don't you think that it's based on a very short-sighted approach? Right now, as far as technology, for instance, technology is concerned, India is not as technologically advanced as the European countries. And this present framework of the agreements which we have, it is based upon the status quo. It is based upon the present conditionalities, the conditions which exist. So this would not lead to India becoming a technological sovereign power, because it is based upon the status quo, the present conditions. And it is not based upon a long-term sight. It is primarily based upon a short-sighted aspect of trade. So this is the negative, the limitation of bilateral pacts, right? Next thing is the major power behavior as far as trade is concerned. As I already told you in the beginning, trade is being used as a geopolitical tool, strategic tool. Let's talk about China. The example which I gave you. China at various instances, it has stopped the supply of various items, critical minerals. Now we already know China is a dominant player, the strongest player as far as the manufacturing supply chains are concerned. And China at various points of time, what it has done is it has clamped down the exports of those critical items to various countries. Now, if I as a country, let's say I'm very good at manufacturing cars, and cars need the electronic components. Let's say China stops and I'm completely dependent on China as far as that particular electronic component is concerned. Would I be able to expand at scale as far as my car production is concerned if China stops the supply of that particular electronic component, which China has done at many points of time? Similarly, let's talk about US. US has, at many instances, see why we are giving the example is to make sure that you understand the whole picture and you use these instances, these examples in your answers. Let's talk about US. US has used tariffs as a geopolitical tool. It has compelled countries, and not just the countries with which it does not have good relations, even its allies, South Korea, Canada, France, for instance. So it is compelling other countries to do what it wants, primarily POTUS. Why? Because ultimately it wants to it's working on a very nationalist-driven agenda. America first, make America great again. It is asking India to reduce the oil supplies from Russia because it thinks that what we are paying back to Russia is being used in the war. And it says that if India won't do it, we will impose sanctions. Let's talk about Chabahar Port. India extensively invested in Chabahar Port, Shahid Beheshti terminal, so that we could have access to Afghanistan and Central Asian republics and further to Russia. But what is the status quo? US has repeatedly warned India that it would impose sanctions on this particular project. And because of this, the whole project is in a deadlock. There's a stalemate as far as Chabahar Port is concerned. So these are some of the issues, right? Emerging challenges with respect to India. The very first is over-dependence risk. Look at this particular infographic, very beautiful. It tells you the dependency which India has. 43.8% of India's imports come from just 5 countries. China, almost $113.45 US billion. It comprises 15.73. Russia, 8.85. UAE, 8.79. And then you have US, 6.33, and Saudi Arabia 4.18. And again, the source is from Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Almost 45% of our imports are dependent on 5 countries, just 5 countries. Look at the status of diversification we have. And that is what leads to the strategic issues, the security issues with respect to energy. See what is happening. India is not a party to this particular conflict which is going on in West Asia, which involves Iran, US, and Israel. But still we have very good relations with Israel. We have good relations with US. We have balanced relations with Iran. Still our kitchens are being affected, even though we are not a party, because we are critically dependent on the energy imports. Over dependence. That is what you'll have to understand. And there is a dominance of few players. Let's talk about China. At a broad macro level, China is the most dominant player as far as the supply chains are concerned. Manufacturing supply chains, assembly lines, electronic equipment, semiconductors, whatever. Let's talk about US. US still is the dominant player as far as the financial transfers are concerned, as far as technology is concerned. So these countries are using their dominance as a geopolitical tool. Next is strategic vulnerabilities, supply chains. We are described as the pharmacy of the world because we export generic medicines, especially to continents like Africa. And it is really well appreciated that India does that, generic medicines, low-cost medicines. But understand what lies at the base of those medicines, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs. Almost 65 to 70% dependence is there on China for the APIs, which form the very base, the raw materials for the medicines. Read this. India makes the pills, but China supplies the raw materials. India imports almost 70% of APIs from China. That is the status quo. We are critically dependent on one particular country. Let's say China stops this supply or controls the supply. That would obviously affect India's exports to other countries, even India's domestic consumption. Or let's talk about electronics and semiconductors. We are almost 100% dependent as far as the semiconductor chips, the advanced chips are concerned. I'm not talking about the plain chips. I'm talking about those, obviously not the Lays. I'm talking about the plain chips which are used in electronics. That is not a concern we are having right now. I'm talking about the advanced chips. For example, those manufactured by NVIDIA or AMD. So those chips, almost 100% dependency exists on various countries around the world. Taiwan, South Korea, China. Or let's talk about the electronics, battery storage systems. Solar modules, we have done enough. But still we are critically dependent on the solar modules and cells. Let's talk about energy and critical minerals. Crude oil, LPG, LNG, energy sovereignty. That is again a very important concern for India. Or let's talk about the critical minerals. Almost 70%, 70 to 75% of the capacity, production capacity is with China. Almost 85% of the refining capacity of these critical minerals, which include the rare earth elements, that is alone with China. And that forms almost the quintessential element, the most important element of any electronic equipment. You talk about phones, you talk about watches, you talk about any digital equipment, the cameras, anything, all contain those critical minerals. So we are having a critical dependency on various countries, and that is not a good thing, right? Then shrinking strategic autonomy. See, earlier was to happen pre-Trump period. We had almost, there was a triangle, Russia, China, US, and we managed the relation with these 3 countries. Effectively, we are trying to manage well. But right now things have changed. As Russia is entrapped in the Ukraine war, Ukraine crisis, Russia is being weakened. There is the imposition of various sanctions on Russia. And that is leading to the development of Russia-China nexus. Russia is getting into the orbit of China. And that is compromising the interests of India. Because India is not able, we say that we follow the strategic autonomy, but we are not able to follow it effectively. Why? Because there is risk of sanctions by the US. So this is something which you'll have to understand. And this is basically constraining the diplomatic flexibility which we have. It is constraining or limiting the choices which we have, right? Choices in the international relations. Then the weaponization of trade. Post Galwan clashes, what we saw that China deliberately restricted the supply of certain essential components, electronic components to India. And that affected the strategic security of India, the manufacturing capacity of India. Or let's talk about US. US is in a way not allowing India to have the oil supplies from Russia. It is not allowing India to develop the Chabahar port because for US, these countries are adversaries and it has this CATSA, countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act. So it is saying that if any country would have relations with these countries, North Korea, Russia, or Iran, sanctions would be imposed on that particular country, in addition to the sanctions which are already imposed on these three countries. So this is a grave concern. Then technological dependence. See, again, what we generally say is that we have had a jobless growth. Why? Because we basically shifted directly from the agrarian setup, from the agricultural-led economy to that of a services-led economy. We basically missed this part of manufacturing. Now we are trying to focus on that. But once we talk about the manufacturing aspect, understand, in the current times, manufacturing has become technologically intensive. There is the infusion of technology, integration of technology in the supply chains, blockchain technology, cloud computing, so as to make the manufacturing more efficient. If India has to compete with the other countries around the world, we're not talking about Japan or we're not talking about South Korea. Let's talk about the other powers. Let's talk about Vietnam or Bangladesh. They have become the powerhouses as far as manufacturing is concerned. We'll have to integrate technology. But that technology is not available. The intellectual property rights or the patents are in the developed countries. So that is an issue. Plus we have red tapeism. The foreign investors, they find it really tough to come and invest in India. Though things are getting better, but still there are issues, right? Standard setting deficit. We may be the largest market in the world. We may be one of the largest consumers. But are we deciding the standards of the technology? Let's, for instance, talk about the 5G. Did we decide the technological standards to be followed as far as the expansion of 5G is concerned? Now we'll have the 6G, right? So technological standards, I mean to say the phones, the laptops, or anything, internet protocol. Are we deciding these standards? That is an issue. So in order, one who controls the standards basically controls the market. So India would have to focus on having its own standards, right? Now, we have our own strength also. We have strength in the form of, and this is something which is really worth praising. India has become one of the largest expansive markets or areas as far as digital public infrastructure is concerned. Let's talk about India's stack. What is India's stack? Those public digital goods, for example, Aadhaar, Unified Payment Interface, DigiLocker. So we have become one of the best countries as far as the implementation of these digital public goods is concerned. Even developed countries like Germany or France, they want to emulate, they want to learn from India's practices. And what really matters, that we have already done this in India. Why not we create the open digital ecosystems and capitalize on that so that even the developed countries buy our products? Next aspect is artificial intelligence collaboration. We have a very good talent pool. We have some of the best minds in the country as far as the artificial intelligence technology is concerned. So why not we can go for the potential coalition? Let's suppose what the article talks about, that we can have a coalition of 4 countries, France, Japan, UAE, and India. Where France would provide, if you're talking about the artificial intelligence, it would provide the research base. Japan would provide the hardware. Then UAE would provide the capital. And India would provide the talent, the workforce. So if we combine, if we just have this particular, if we go with this particular coalition, all countries can benefit. So that is what you'll have to understand, right? What should be the way forward? Way forward strategic responses which India can have. The very first is shift to sectoral plurilateralism. See, again, at the world level, what we are witnessing is the breakdown of the multilateral world order. Multilateralism is collapsing. So we need to find out ways. Bilateral pacts are good, but they are not having a long-term view. Why not go with plurilateral aspects, which involve certain countries, especially the middle powers, not the developed countries, not those countries which are using trade as a geopolitical leverage. Here we are talking about US and China. Why not we go with a partnership, just as I told you, this plurilateral agreement as far as AI is concerned, so that all countries benefit. So there is a need for plurilateral, small focused coalitions. It can be with respect to AI, it can be with respect to green energy. So that should be followed. Then build supply chain resilience. We need to have our own indigenous, robust, domestic manufacturing base. Hoga kaise? How this would be done? Through various policy tools. For example, we have the very good production-linked incentive scheme. Production-linked incentive that right now I am producing 100 goods. The next year I produce 110. So I have increased this incremental production. I have increased by 10. So I'll be incentivized for this based on the incremental production. We have this, now this is from the PIB, which says that it is applicable in 14 key sectors. For example, we have mobile manufacturing, specified electronic components, critical key starting materials, drugs, active pharmaceutical ingredients. I talked about that, right? White goods, solar modules, advanced chemistry cell. So we have this for 14 sectors. Why not expand it further? For example, why not expand to the battery components or to the wind energy components? That is not included right now. Or for example, the chemical intermediates which form the very backbone of industrial supply chain. So there can be the incorporation of various goods as far as the production linked incentive is concerned. We have come with various schemes. We have come with the electronic components manufacturing scheme, ECMS. So these schemes must be given impetus, right? For example, the National Semiconductor Mission, right? Leverage digital public infrastructure. We have already have very good application. For example, DigiLocker. Why not we create similar public goods for other markets, African countries, Latin American countries, Asian countries? They don't have such products. Why not help them create such products? So this is again the need of the hour. Become a standard setting power. Very important. We need to come up with the standards. For that, we'll have to go ahead. We'll have to walk fast. We'll have to, in fact, run as far as technology is concerned. Let's talk about 6G. We are having trials, 6G trials in various institutes. Why not we set the standards? So that is very, very important, right? Lead in the AI ethics, global partnership for artificial intelligence, GPAI, or technological standards in various technologies, communications, information technology, strategic economic diplomacy. We need to diversify the partnerships. We cannot be solely reliant on these limited number of players. What about African countries? They also have a lot of critical minerals. Why not come in pacts? Pacts which benefit both the country. Co-development, co-production, collaboration, right? Or Latin American countries or ASEAN, Central African republics, right? South-South cooperation. Now this was basically a product of Buenos Aires Partnership Agreement of 1978, South-South cooperation. So why we should focus upon the South-South cooperation is because this would be a kind of an environment would be created which would benefit all. This would benefit India, this would benefit the other countries, the southern countries. So we should give impetus to that. Invest in core technologies, semiconductors, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, blockchain. We are already doing it, but it needs to be, the intensity needs to be increased. Let's talk about the National Semiconductor Mission 2.0. We have come with this. Previously, we focused upon the ATMP, the National Semiconductor Mission 1, assembly, testing, marking, and packaging. Right now, the National Semiconductor Mission focuses upon the full stack development, incorporating even the development of the semiconductor chips. right? So such schemes must be given impetus. They must have a good funding base. Because understand, if we do not focus upon these things right now, we'll be lagged. We'll lag behind. And that we cannot afford. With the kind of demography we have, with the kind of potential we have, with the kind of talent we have, we need to really give impetus on having our own domestic base, on coming up with partnerships with like-minded countries, LMCs, like-minded countries, so that it benefits all in general. And therefore, we would be able to realize the idea of Viksit Bharat or Vishwaguru, as Prime Minister says. Let's have a mains practice question, very important topic. Global trade is increasingly being shaped by geopolitical considerations rather than economic efficiency. In this context, examine the challenges faced by India and suggest a suitable strategy to safeguard its interests. 15 marks, 250 words. Please do write, as I've already said, that there is no other alternative to answer writing. Practice, and we have already provided the content. In the Analyst, we try to focus on providing the best of the content. So try to write the answer on this particular basis. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and also let us know in the comments. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is about why quotas alone won't help as far as enhancing the participation of women in politics. Now, see, what you'll have to understand is that there's an atmosphere about the Women Reservation Bill. We recently had the 131st Constitutional Amendment Bill, which was defeated, which talked about the delimitation aspect and also the reservation for women. Now, we have a particular data point. We have an article which has been published in the data point section of the Hindu, which basically showcases the study done by CSDS Lokniti. Now, what it is trying to say, and these numbers can very well be used in the exam. We'll talk about that what are the issues, and we'll also talk about the way forward. So very important component of GS2, social issues and women. What it is trying to say is that even if you give the quota, even if you give a reservation, that is not something which is really going to enhance women participation. That's not something which is going to have a substantial change, because there are deep entrenched notions of patriarchy. There is the issue with the social conditioning which we have in our society, and that needs to be changed. The survey talks about these things. Again, all numbers need not to be memorized, just for the understanding sake. You can use few of the data points in the answers. So the core issue, what we are talking about these days is a women reservation aspect. But the question is that whether the quotas can overcome the deep-rooted structural barriers which we have in the society. Bhai, you may give the reservation, but point is, would it really transform the picture which we have? Would it really transform the paradigm? Would it really make the women equal participant or equal stakeholder? That is an issue. Because there is a paradox which talks about the participation and representation paradox. India has, if you talk about the general elections or even the elections at the state level, what you'll observe is with time, the women participation, the voter turnout has significantly increased. Women voters, in fact, in many of the cases, they are more than the male voters. But if we look at the representation of women in Lok Sabha, or there are some legislative assemblies in the state, in India, which basically don't have any of the women members. So this is again a very concerning point, that though we have good number of participants, though we have a good voter turnout, what about the representation? That is an issue. High and rising voter turnout, but there is low representation, almost 15% at the Lok Sabha, right? Now, if you look at this particular infographic, what it says is women's electoral participation across socio-economic groups. What are the socio-economic groups? The very first is on the basis of locality. Then you have the level of education. Then you have the age groups, right? Then you have the other part, which is the caste communities. And then you have the economic class. What the data point is trying to convey is what is the kind of participation, electoral participation overall. We're not just talking about the voting aspect, we're also talking about the aspects of the representation. What it says, if you look at not at all active, that is the highest among all the socio-economic categories: locality, level of education, age groups, caste communities, and you have economic class. What does it showcase? It showcases that women are not being given the equal opportunity to become a representative of people. There are biases in the society. There are hindrances, there are barriers which are stopping the women participation. Though they have increased, though the numbers may have increased as far as the voter turnout is concerned, but is the picture same as far as the representation is concerned? The answer is a plain no, right? Low engagement across the education levels, caste, class, age categories. Active political participation remains restricted. We're talking about as leaders. Though, and this is again a very important point, there's a notion which has been developed that the males are better political leaders, but that is countered if you look at the third tier of the governance, the panchayats and municipalities. There is a reservation for women seats, but that has even surpassed. There's a very good participation of women at the third tier. So if that is possible, why not at the other tiers? Why not at the state level? Why not at the national level? That is a concern, right? Now, party level barriers. So if you just look at table 2, what it says, public perception of gender bias in candidate selection and electoral success. Even when a man and a woman equally good candidate, political parties always prefer a man over woman while giving tickets. And almost 44% of the women agree on that. This means that they know that even if the woman candidate is better, she has a lesser chance of getting the ticket by the party. So again, a very important concern, right? This is the kind of perception which they have. Institutional bias within the political parties, because for political parties, winnability, who or which candidate has more of the chances of winning the elections, that is a more important factor. They're not really concerned about the gender. So this is a very important issue. Then let's talk about structural and social constraints. There are some of the barriers which have been highlighted by the study. The very first is patriarchal. Look at this, patriarchal structure. We have so many schemes, and it's great that the government came up with Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. But, in most of the urban places, you may think that situation is very good. But if you go in the remote interiors of the country, you would find that there are deep entrenched notions of patriarchy. There are issues. Girl childs are not being preferred. So there are issues. Then household responsibilities. What are the barriers? Patriarchal structure, household responsibility, individual barriers, cultural norms, constraints related to the finance or political structure, negative image of politics, other barriers. So there are certain important barriers. Then let's talk about household as a site of exclusion. Means what? Extent of patriarchal dominance within the household. Strong dominance, some dominance, low dominance. Almost 66, two-third. In two-third of the households, there is a kind of a dominance where women are not able to exercise their free will. They have to do as what is said by their husband or by the family. So this is the issue. Then let's talk about what it is trying to say is that private sphere, whatever is happening in the private sphere, that is shaping the political choices, political viewpoints. Whatever the man in the house, whichever party the man wants to vote for, that party would be voted by the women in that particular house. So this is the state which we have, right? Low political aspirations. They're not really interested in politics. Kuch nahi hoga. Let's talk about this. Women's autonomy in participating political activities. No freedom at all, very little freedom, some freedom. The willingness of women to enter politics. Almost, which all women? How many of the percent of the women are really willing to participate in politics? Just 28%. Almost 60% say no, not really interested. So this is a very grave issue, right? So this is what you'll have to understand. What are the limits of reservation policy? See, you may, with the reservation, improve the numerical representation. You can increase the number of women. But are they really going to work on their own will or on the requirements of their constituency? Or there would be a similar syndrome, Panchayat Pati syndrome, which we have at the third level. Though we have very good participants, women representative at the third tier. But you must know that in many of the cases, they are not driving the office. It is basically their husbands who are basically driving the office of the panchayat. So that is the issue. So we have improving the numerical representation versus the debate addressing the deep-rooted inequalities. Is it sufficient? Is it a way through which we can really enhance or remove the deep-rooted inequalities which we have in the society? Quotas without reforms. If we are going with quotas without reforms, then this is just symbolic inclusion, not substantive empowerment. If you really want to substantially improve the conditions of women in the society, you'll have to go with certain other frameworks. What are they? The very first is reform party candidate selection process. Winnability is, obviously, political parties would focus on winnability. But why not focus on those? Why you are just going, see, politics in India, the sad part is that even in the 21st century, even after so many years of independence, there is no politics of development which we talk about. Politics is about the caste issues, the religion, and we all know what is happening. So what you'll have to understand is that there has to be a change in the mindset. There has to be a change that on what basis politics should be done. And the selection of the candidate also should be based upon whether the person is really capable or not. We have seen many of the women leaders, very capable leaders. So they should be given the opportunity. Enhance women's autonomy within the households. Though it's going to be very tough, especially for those having a patriarchal mindset. But that is the need of the hour. And that is what we say, that women have a double burden. They have their own familial obligations. They have to fulfill the familial obligations. They have to take care of the children, do the house chores, and at the same time, they're expected to earn. So we'll have to make sure that there is equal participation. Equal participation, and there has to be some kind of autonomy which should be given to the women, right? Promote political awareness and grassroots engagement. Political parties themselves should come up with various awareness campaigns. They should themselves incentivize women participation or representation in politics. Then we have address the intersectional inequalities. What do we mean by intersectional inequalities? See, we know that women, there is discrimination against women, okay? But what you would find is that the low class women, those having low economic capacity, they are discriminated more than the high class women. Or let's say the women in the rural areas are discriminated more than the urban areas. So we are not just talking about the gender here, we are talking about the other basis. It can be the income, it can be the caste, it can be the class, anything. So we'll have to not just focus on one aspect of gender, rather we'll have to focus on different aspects. Caste, class, gender, so all these things. That is how we can really enhance the participation of women. So reservation is something which is good, but that is not a panacea. That is not the sole remedy for this particular crisis. We'll have to go with multiple reforms at different levels, at different layers, right? Very small question. This can be attempted. 10 marks, 150 words. Reservation alone cannot ensure substantive political empowerment of women. Discuss. Tell the context, tell the issues along with the data points. Then you give the way forward. Do right, because that is really very important. Let's go to the next section. Coming to the prelims pointer section, we have the first topic which talks about the indirect repercussions which India is facing because of the West Asian crisis, primarily in the form of the energy imports. Now, what you'll have to understand is that West Asia region also serves as one of the most important regions which supplies fertilizers to India. And because of the war, what has happened is it has substantially increased the prices of the fertilizers. And this gives a grave challenge. It poses a grave challenge to India's agriculture sector, right? Let's talk about this. Urea, the prices have doubled. A near doubling of the prices within 2 months reflects the supply shocks from the US-Israel versus Iran conflict and the closure of the vital Strait of Hormuz. Tell me in the comments that the Strait of Hormuz is between which country? What are the two countries between which you have the Strait of Hormuz? Waterway since February 28th. The ammonia facilities of Qatar Energy and Saudi Arabia's Madin are shut following the Iranian strikes. We have the drone strikes by the Iranian IRGC, forcing us to source mainly from Indonesia and Malaysia. So now we are looking at diversification. That is what we discussed in the very first topic, that there is a need to diversify the sources. Previously, we were solely reliant on the West Asia region for many of the commodities and the goods. Now we are diversifying. So this should have been done a bit earlier, right? Saudi Arabia was also the largest DAP, diammonium phosphate supplier. Now it's Morocco and Jordan that have to also cater to South America and other markets. So there has been an increasing cost of these inputs, and that is compromising the interests of India. All this could pose a challenge for ensuing coming Kharif crop season, whose plantings will take off with the southwest monsoons onset from June onwards. The total requirement of urea for Kharif 2026 was 19.4 million tons, whereas the actual availability at the start of April was hardly 5.5 million tons. So there is a deficit. We don't have the adequate quantity with us of urea. India annually consumes almost 39 to 40 million tons of urea, with 30 to 31 produced domestically and the balance imported. Can you just imagine? A good amount of urea is also imported. We're almost completely dependent on the phosphate and the potash, but urea is also imported. The Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and that is where you'll have to understand how to read the newspaper, how to take out the important information which can be asked in the examination. So which all are the Gulf Cooperation Council countries? You have these. We have Oman, we have Qatar, we have Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. Just look at this particular map. Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Oman, and these are the countries which are basically the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and also Bahrain, right? Now, account for nearly 40% of India's urea imports pre-war. Over 60% of its imports of liquefied natural gas, LNG, which is primarily methane, right? CH4. Raw material used for indigenous manufacturing of urea came from Qatar, UAE, and Oman. Lower imports and domestic production can constrain urea availability in the upcoming Kharif season. So agriculture can be compromised because we don't have the adequate supplies of the fertilizers. Now, what it also talks about, the article talks about, is a new thing, which is biostimulants, right? What are these biostimulants? Can be asked in the prelims. Biostimulants, unlike fertilizers, they are not fertilizers, first of all, don't contain nutrients per se, and are derived from microbes. So they are derived from the microbes, for example, bacteria and fungi. Soil organic matter, humic and fulvic acids, seaweed extracts, and other naturally occurring substances. These can enhance the nutrient use efficiency. So what is nutrient use efficiency? You are basically giving an amount, you're pouring an amount of fertilizer to the plants, but not all of it is being consumed for the nourishment of the plant. Much of it is also wasted. So you just apply what is really needed. So if you just do that, you would reduce the amount of the fertilizers you are applying, and that you would come to know on the basis of the nitrogen use efficiency, fertilizer use efficiency, right, of the fertilizers applied by the farmers. The NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium present in the fertilizers aren't necessarily available for the uptake by the plant. For example, P is often logged in soils, making it unavailable to the plant roots. Even the nutrients that are taken up by the plant may not convert into biomass and yield. Biostimulants basically modify the internal plant processes to improve their functionality and nutrient use efficiency. So in this time of shortage, during the times of the shortage of the fertilizers, biostimulants can definitely help to increase the fertilizer use efficiency. Biostimulants include phosphate solubilizing bacteria that convert the insoluble phosphorus in soil to soluble orthophosphates, which are immediately available for the plant uptake and use. We can have similar biomolecules extracted from the microbes and plants that can even be blended with chemical fertilizers. It will make the later work better, thereby reducing the consumption. So this is what you'll have to understand. Three things have been covered: the fertilizer shortage, the GCC countries, and biostimulants. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is about a report which has been published by the International Labour Organization, which talks about that how the toxic workplaces affect the mental health of the people, and in many cases, it has also led to the death of many people around the world. More than 840,000 people die each year around the globe from health conditions linked to psychosocial risks, including long working hours, job insecurity, and workplace harassment, according to the report by the ILO, International Labour Organization. These work-related psychosocial risks are mainly associated with the cardiovascular diseases, hypertension, heart-related diseases, and mental disorders, stress, depression, including suicide. The report prescribes policy interventions at both the levels of the government and industry to address the situation, along with empowering the collectivization, bargaining power. Because what is collectivization? People, the workers need to unite so that they can have their own bargaining power. That is what the author is talking about. Psychosocial risk factors are responsible for almost 8,40,000 deaths annually due to associated with cardiovascular diseases and mental disorders. We had the case where we had the EY case where a woman committed suicide because of the work pressure. So that is a reality. These risks also lead to 45 million disability-adjusted life years lost each year. The combined impact of cardiovascular disease and mental disorders associated with the psychosocial risk factors is estimated to result in 1.37% of global GDP lost. So it is not only having a loss in terms of the human lives, it is also having a loss in terms of the economy, right? ILO estimates that globally 35% of the workers work more than 48 hours per week. Exposure to bullying and other forms of violence and harassment is another major concern, especially the women workers. The ILO estimates that 23% of the workers globally have experienced at least one form of violence or harassment in their working life, with psychological violence being the most prevalent at 18%. So there is violence at the level of psychology also that is being perpetrated. So we really need to work on this particular aspect so that we can have healthy workplaces, not toxic workplaces, right? Let's also talk about the International Labour Organization, the ILO functions. The International Labour Organization performs a wide range of functions aimed at establishing social justice, promoting fair labor standards, and ensuring the protection of the workers across the world. It sets international labor norms, provides technical support to countries, and monitors compliance to improve working conditions globally. But what the ILO is all about? The ILO was established after the World War I to promote the global labor rights and later became the first specialized agency of the UN, continuously working for social justice and fair labor standards worldwide. Over time, it has played a significant role in shaping the labor reforms, supporting decolonization, and strengthening the democratic labor movements. Established in 1919, so very old organization, and the Treaty of Versailles as a part of the League of Nations. So this was initially made as a part of the League of Nations. It has still survived, right? And one of the very important organizations. Became the first specialized agency of the UN in 1946. Headquarters is in Geneva, Switzerland. Founded on the belief that social justice is essential for universal and lasting peace. Works to promote internationally recognized human and labor rights. Awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1969 for advancing the peace and workers' welfare. What are the functions in specific? Formulates the international labor standards, supervises the implementation, provides technical assistance to various countries around the world, supports employment promotion, conducts research and publishes report, encourages the social dialogue, promotes social protection, eliminates the child labor and forced labor. There are certain core conventions of the ILO, very important, and that's the reason I have provided so that you can have a clear glance at what are these core conventions. The 8 fundamental conventions from the Global Foundation form the global foundation for the worker protection. They address the child labor, forced labor, discrimination, and right to organize. They are a part of the wider UN human rights framework, and ratification reflects a nation's commitment to fair labor standards. What are these 8 core conventions? Forced Labor Convention, Abolition of Forced Labor Convention, Equal Remuneration Convention, Discrimination Convention, Minimum Age Convention, and also note the numbers, can be asked in the prelims. Worst Form of Child Labor Convention, Freedom of Association Convention, Right to Organize, and Collective Bargaining Convention. This I have taken from the PIB. Please note, now this is from 2017. What it says is, India ratified 6 out of the 8 core fundamental international labor organization conventions. India has ratified 6 out of the 8 core fundamental international labor conventions. What we have not ratified, they are important. We have not ratified 2 core conventions, namely Freedom of Association and Protection of the Right to Organize Convention, number 87, and Right to Organize and Collective Bargaining Convention of 1949. That is, the number is 98. Do remember, can be asked in the prelims. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, it talks about the esports and the Online Gaming Authority of India. Important. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology on Wednesday notified the rules allowing the registration of e-sport games and the firms running them, which will come into effect from May 1st. The rules come as subordinate legislation, the delegated legislation for the Promotion and Regulation of Online Gaming Act of 2025. So this is an act which basically regulates the online games, and this is the act which forms the very basis of the Online Game Authority of India, right? The Online Gaming Authority of India, OGAI, will run as an attached office within the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. As a fully digital organization has been set up under the rules, representatives from the Ministries of Home Affairs and Law have been added to OGAI. Under the new rules, registration for online social games will only be required and triggered when the center notifies a specific category of games as requiring such registration. So it's not applicable to all. Only when the center notifies, then you'll have to register. Registration for esports is mandatory, but for esports, it's mandatory. Information Technology Secretary S. Krishnan told media that the rules have enabling provisions to regulate and require age classifications of the video games in the future, should the government deem it necessary to address the issues of addiction. We already know that there is this issue of addiction. Recently in Ghaziabad, we had the serious issue where the girls committed suicide. Many girls, there were siblings who committed suicide. So there is an addiction with respect to the games, so that must be clamped down. Most games which are not money games should be able to operate with no obligation to necessarily either be determined or registered. On the issue of betting markets hosting wagers, that is betting, gambling, on Indian elections and cricket matches, Mr. Krishnan said that such websites were being blocked as and when they were brought to the notice. Access through the virtual private networks, VPN, again, through that people are accessing these websites, is a slightly thorny issue. He added, we are trying to see how we can regulate the VPNs more effectively. So that is what you'll have to understand. Online Gaming Authority of India is a statutory body under this particular act. I hope it is clear. Let's go to the next topic. Come to the next topic. This is about the National Investigation Agency, which has sought the death penalty for Yasin Malik, the separatist leader. Let's talk about the National Investigation Agency. It's a federal counter-terrorism law enforcement agency of India, thoroughly professional investigative agency that matches the best international standards. It has extensive powers to investigate the terror activities in any part of India, register a case and arrest people without the permission of the state government. So it's a very powerful body. The NIA is a statutory body established under the NIA Act of 2008, post the Mumbai attacks, and functions under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Remember the ministry, important. It was established after the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, which exposed the limitations of existing intelligence agencies to prevent and fight such attacks. The main objective of NIA are in-depth professional investigation of scheduled offences, which are scheduled in the Act itself, using the latest scientific methods, forensic analysis, building a database of all terrorist-related information, and assisting. For example, the Red Fort blast is being investigated by the NIA, assisting states and other investigation agencies in the investigation of terror cases. Statutory provisions. It was established under the National Investigation Agency Act of 2008. Investigation of scheduled offences on a receipt of a report from the state government. If the central government thinks that the offence is fit case to be investigated by the agency, it shall direct the NIA to investigate the offence. The central government may, without the report from the state suo motu on its own, direct the agency to investigate the said offence. So either the state can request or the NIA, the central government, suo motu on its own can initiate the investigation. Power to investigate connected offences. While investigating any scheduled offences, the agency may also investigate any other connected offence which the accused has committed. Similar line offences. State government to extend external assistance to National Investigation Agency. The state government shall extend all the assistance and cooperation to the agency for the investigation of the scheduled offences. Investigation of offences under the other acts. For prosecuting under the UAPA and certain other offences, the NIA has to take the sanction of the central government. Prosecution of offences. When the investigation is complete, the cases are placed before the NIA special court. So there is a special court aspect as far as NIA is concerned. The schedule of the NIA Act lists several acts such as the Atomic Energy Act, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA, Anti-Hijacking Act. Institutional framework. The NIA Act provides for the creation of the National Investigation Agency to investigate and prosecute the offences specified in the schedule. The NIA officers have the same powers as the other police officers concerning the investigation. The NIA comes under the jurisdiction of Ministry of Home Affairs. Special courts. The Act empowers the central and the state government to establish special courts for the trial of scheduled offences. The appeal lies to the High Court of the concerned state. Appeal lies to the High Court of the concerned state. This is again important, can be asked in the prelims. NIA and CBI, the differences. It's a statutory agency under the NIA Act. It is not a statutory agency, however, it derives the power from the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act of 1946. It functions under the jurisdiction of Ministry of Home Affairs. It functions under the jurisdiction of Ministry of Personal, Public Grievance and Pensions. Remember, this is important because there's a confusion which exists regarding the jurisdiction of the CBI. The NIA investigates incidents of terrorist attacks, funding of terrorism and terror-related crimes. The CBI investigates crime of corruption, economic offences and serious and organised crimes. Dacoity, murder, rape, serious offences. The central government can order NIA to investigate a scheduled offence in any state. The NIA has the power to probe terror attacks in any part of the country without the permission of the state government. The central government can order the CBI to investigate a crime in any state, but only with the consent of the respective state government. The Supreme Court and the High Courts, however, can order the CBI to investigate such a crime anywhere in the country without the consent of the state. So these are the important differences. Please make sure that you give attention to them. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion is a mention of Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, which plans to make one grid, one price a reality in power sector. This gives us the opportunity to study what CERC is all about. The Central Electricity Regulatory Commission is a statutory body established by the Government of India under the provisions of the Electricity Regulatory Commissions Act of 1998. It is a central commission for the purpose of Electricity Act 2003, which has repealed the ERC Act of 1998. Composition: the commission consists of a chairperson and 4 other members, including the chairperson, Central Electricity Authority, who is an ex officio member of the commission. Then you have the commission intends to promote competition, efficiency and economy in the bulk power markets, improve the quality of the supply, promote investments and advise the government on the removal of institutional barriers to bridge the demand-supply gap and thus foster the interests of the consumers. To regulate the tariff of the generating companies owned or controlled by the central government, to regulate the tariffs of the generating companies other than those owned or controlled by the central government is specified in Clause A if such generating companies enter into or otherwise have a composite scheme for generation and a sale of electricity in more than one state. To regulate the interstate transmission of electricity, to determine the tariff for the interstate transmission of electricity. Tariff rates are basically determined by the CERC. Interstate transmission. To issue the licenses to persons to function as transmission licensee and the electricity trader with respect to their interstate operations. So it performs a very important regulatory function. That is what you'll have to understand. Here we come at the end of the discussion. I hope you really like the discussion. All the very best. Thank you.